Hello, developers. Hope you are doing well and welcome back to tapaScript. Welcome back to the React series once again. Today, we are going to discuss about a very important topic from React is about handling React forms, especially when the form is with multiple input elements and you have to handle all of them with React state. The HTML forms and React forms are a bit different when it comes to state and the control component. So in this video, we'll first understand a bit of theory about React form, HTML form, and then we'll get down into the doing hands-on to manage state of a React form which is having many input elements with single change handler. Yes, with single change handler we want to handle the state. Let's know how to do it so that you can use this in your programming in the daily basis. As usual, if you like this video, please like and share, and please subscribe to this channel because it motivates me to do better, come back to you with more meaningful content. You can always join tapaScript Discord. The link of that Discord channel is already there in this particular video description. Without any further delay, let us get started. In HTML, forms are used to collect user inputs. Inside the form element, we use a bunch of input elements like text box, password, color, text area, select box, number elements, checkboxes, radio button, and user gives their input on those elements. We also can submit the form to pass those data back to server or for any kind of processing. Thus, the HTML form element also manages its own state because without that, it won't know in which input element what user have given and after submission what to do with those data. When it comes to React, React has its own way to manage states. So why? When you are dealing with form in React, the input elements within the form may get represented in a bit different way. A classic example would be text area itself. When you see the text area in HTML, you will find it in this way. It will have the tag open and the tag closed, and between the tag open and tag close you will find the actual text that comes and sit inside the text area. Of course, in the element along with the element name you would also find attributes, the ID, placeholder, maybe an event handler, ability to add classes, styles, etc. When it comes to React, you would find it in a different way. In React, when you create a text area within the form, you won't manage the text in the text area the way that we have seen for HTML. Rather, you manage it through value, and the value of this particular attribute usually gets managed through state. Rest of the things remain same, like for this text area also you will have change handler or any other applicable handler just like we see in the HTML text area. But the managing part of the value, it makes a lot of difference. So when we manage value for each of these input elements within the form in React, we have to manage them through state. And while managing through state, our objective now in this video to learn is to how to manage them with single handler. It means that if there is a form having so many input elements, we don't want to write handlers for each of these input element. We don't want to write handlers like handle full name change, handle email change, handle password change, handle address change, city change, and things like that. Rather, we want to write one handler called say handle change for the entire form, and in that one handler function we want to handle the change of each of these input elements so that we can keep our code very precise and we follow certain kind of design pattern while implementing it and make things simple. So let's start learning that. Let's start coding. First, we have to create a React project, and along with that, for styling, I'll be using Tailwind CSS. Now, I've already created a template repository on GitHub using React and Tailwind using Vite. In my last video, I have showed you like how to create a template repository like this so that you don't have to write a lot of code every time you want to get started with a React project. You can just click on this button over here called use this template and create a new repository from this template. And then you give a name for this repository called say registration, because we'll be creating a form like registration form, give a description and then create the repository. It will take a while. And now this registration repository has all the boilerplate code, all the scaffolding required for me to get started with ReactJS and Tailwind CSS. If you have missed my last video, please check it out. You can also create a template repository like this for yourself, or if you don't want to create, you can use mine because that's public and there for you. The video link is in the description of this video. Okay, let's get started by cloning this repository and importing in the VS Code. In the registration folder, I have installed all the dependencies using npm install and running the server locally using npm run dev. Now it's available on HTTP localhost 5173. So I'll just go to this URL using my browser. I see the text that comes with the template repository. We are going to modify that. For that, we'll go to VS Code and first start writing our form. In VS Code, expand the SRC directory and click on the app.jsx file to open, because we are going to edit this file. We don't need any of this, so we are going to delete that. Instead of that, we need a form. Inside the form, we will add a bunch of input element. So we'll take a div, and inside the div, first we'll add a label. Say the label is for the full name input element, and along with it, we'll also add an input element which is of type text. We'll give a name to this input element. Let's give it as f name because it is full name. You can give any name. Give it as an ID, a placeholder text so that it looks good. We say enter full name, and we'll make it required so that it is a mandatory attribute. As we have provided an ID to this input, we also have to provide the HTML for that matches the same ID, f name. So you know, like in HTML, there is a for attribute for label, and the value of the for attribute should be tied to the ID attribute of the respective input element. In case of React, it cannot be just for attribute. You have to write it as HTML for. Good. So we have the first element. Let's see in the UI. We have full name label and a way to enter the full name. Good. Don't worry about the styling for now. So we'll be adding a few more elements. For that, let us just copy this div and paste it so that we'll just change it. After full name, we will add an email. The type will be email. We can give the name as email, ID as email, change this as email, and instead of enter full name, we can say enter email. Like this, let us add few more fields. We can add a password field. For that, the type will be password. As you see it here, the type is password. We have given a name and we have given an ID. You can give any name, by the way, that you are looking for. There is no harm. Like this, let us add a few more fields. As you see, after password, we have added another input field called color, and its type is color. The ID is also color so that it gives you a color picker. It's also enclosed within the div. So write that down. Again, I'm not writing all these things as it is repeatable. You can refer to the code which is there in the description of this video. You can follow that link and you can get the source code, so you can actually follow the rest of it, or if you want to copy paste and just make sure that you are running on it faster, you can also do that. But I am explaining each of this div so that you can write it along with my explanation as well. Okay, so next one is an address field. For address field, I have taken a text area, and in this text area I have given the name as address, ID as address is connected to this label's HTML for element. Again, a regular placeholder. This also required. The color field was not required because I kept it as an optional field. This is a mandatory field. And then after that, I have something called city, which is a plain text field again, where user can enter their city. I have given this also a name. So make sure that each of this input element is having a name attribute and it has a valid value, which is important for this particular code. Then we have something called a state. Select in HTML is a combo box or a list box, which also has a bunch of options through which you can select one or more options. So here the input type is select, and the select is having three options: solid, liquid, and gas. And there is also an additional value called choose. It means that if you select something called choose, you are basically not choosing anything. The value is blank. But if you are selecting solid, the value will be solid. If you are selecting liquid, the value will be liquid. If you are selecting gas, the value will be gas. Okay. Then I have a zip or the pin, and this is a number. So the input type is number. Again, there is a name, ID, placeholder, and HTML for. And finally, I have a checkbox. The checkbox says, like, say you are agree. And here, if you see, like previously the label used to come first and then there used to be an input element. Here we have done the reversed. We have first done the checkbox, and beside that there is a label. Okay. Here also you give a name and there is an ID. ID is again connected to your HTML for, and the type is checkbox. So how does this particular page look like at this point of time? Let's see that. All right. So what do we see? The form is there. There is a text box, there is an email, there is a password, there is a color picker. Okay. There is a text area, there is a text box, there is a way to select some element, you can enter some number over here, and you can also do this checkbox, but this doesn't look well. We have to put some style, isn't it? So let's put some style onto this form so that it looks little elegant, and then we'll start our next course of coding. First, let us put some padding around this particular form so that form has some breathing space around it, and then we'll be adding some gap between this label and this text elements, and then putting some kind of border around this text element so that they look little better, right? And they are easily identifiable inside this form. Okay, let's go back to VS Code, and we have now enclosed this form with a fragment, but we have to add some styles around it. So let's add a div instead, and this is also got enclosed. Okay, so here we'll be using Tailwind CSS. So use a class name, and around the form, let's put some padding. Now on each of these div, we can put some margin up and down. So for that, let's add a class name and put a MY of 2, which is like putting a margin top and also a margin bottom. For each of this level, let's put a class again. Let's put a MX4 so that it gives a margin left and a margin right. And for each of this input, let's put some class. Here, as discussed, we'll be putting a border. Let's put a border color, maybe a gray color. Let's make the border rounded and give a little bit of padding. Okay, so we have now styled the label, input, this particular div where the label and input is there, and some padding around the form. We have not styled each of these other elements yet. We are going to do that, but first see how these are coming out. All right, so full name looks better. So that means I can now copy the same style or rest of the elements and make them look a little bit better. So let's go back to VS Code. Again, just copy this class name from this div, go to the next div, paste it over here, copy this class for this label, go to the next div, paste it over here. Same thing for the input, paste it over here. So we have now done for full name and email. Not bad. Full name and email is done. Now you repeat the same thing for password, color, address, city, and everything else, except the checkbox. The checkbox one will be a little bit different because here the label and the text has swapped. So we will take care of that, but do at least from password to pin exactly the same thing that we have done for full name and email. That's it. I have now added the same class to all other pair, password, color, address, and everything, except the checkbox, because in checkbox, the checkbox element comes first and then the label. So the styling will be a little bit different. That's why you see there is no gap. So let's fix that as well. So for checkbox, come to the input field as a class name and add a MX4. So instead of adding the MX4 to the label, we will be adding the MX4 to the input field because input field comes first. Now we'll see some gap. Very well. So we have the form ready. The next thing that we are going to deal with now is to do the state management for this form. First, we need to define the state for this particular form in React. Now, how are we going to define the state? One way definitely that we can define a state is like we can define the state for each of this input element. For example, we can have a state for first name, we can have a state for email, password, and so on. But considering the number of elements in this form, and it also might grow in the future, it doesn't make much sense to deal with this individual state in our React component. Rather, we can create one state and manage the state as an object. Okay, so first is to create the state. How do you create the state in React? For that, you need useStateHook, right? So first, let's import useState from React. After importing the useStateHook, we can now create a state. Let's call this state as contact, and it also gives us an updater method. Let's call it as setContact. We can use the useStateHook. You are new to useState means you please go through my video on useState. So I have a complete React series where I've explained each of this hook, each of the standard hook. You can also look into this useState video and get more idea about what useState does. But at a very high level, it gives us all the ways to manage the state within the component, where this particular value contact will be the current value of the state, and using the setContact function, we'll be able to mutate the state. We'll be able to change the state value. That's it. And then we can initialize the state with some initializer, with some initial values. So what we are going to initialize the state with? Here, we will be managing the state as an object because we don't want to create one state called first name state, address state, password state, all this. rather one state having an object that manages all these input elements. So we can initialize it with an object. Now what will be the attributes for those object? How can we manage this state? Now we have bunch of input elements. We have fname, we have email, password, color, etc. Now for each of this input element, we can manage a property within this object. For example, we can have something called fname colon empty string. That means right now the property fname of this particular object is initialized with an empty string, and this fname is supposed to manage the state for this input element whose name is fname. So like that, you can create other properties for other elements. Just make sure of one thing. The name of this particular property should be similar to the name of the input element. Why? We'll come there in a bit. But for now, let's create other properties. So for example, if I have to create for email, I'll just copy this email, come over here, create a property called email and initialize it with an empty string. Can you do for the rest of it? We have now done for all except the last checkbox. Last checkbox name is agree and it's a checkbox. So that means it can have the value like on and off or check true or false. So for that, I don't want to really initialize it with a string. Rather, I'll be taking the same name and initialize it with false. Sounds good? So now we have a state called contact whose initial value is an object. In this object, each of the property is a key value pair where each of the key corresponds to each of the element, and how they corresponds because the property name is exactly same with the name of that particular element. Okay, so we are good so far. The next thing that we are going to do is to handle the events for each of this input element, and that's what our target today is, to write a single handle change event. To write the single handle change event and manage it, the first step we have already done. We have created one state. We have not created multiple state. We need to add an on change event, and here we'll be adding a function because when something change into this input element, this handle change has to get called. Now again, notice here, I have not named this particular function as handle first name change. I just named it as handle change, and we are going to use a single handle change method. So copy this on change and go and paste it to the all input elements that you have here. So for the email, password, color, address, city, the state select box, the zip, and also the checkbox. So now we have on change handler for each of this input, and we are handling through one function. So let's take this function name, go to the top of the component and write this function handle change. For now, let's give a console.log. We all love console.log. Okay, we know that in React, every function that we give as a value to an event handler implicitly gets an event object. So it means this function also will get an event object. Now from this event object, we can get event dot target dot value. What is that? Event dot target dot value. It's the value that when someone type inside the input element, we can capture that value through this event, and that's what we are printing. Okay, let's go back to our UI. Right click here, click on inspect. On the DevTools, click on console, keep the console open. Now start typing something to each of this text box. For example, on the full name, let me type A. So if you see something to change, the value A is coming. Great. In the email, type C. Something to change, C. Password, let's type number 1. We are seeing number 1. Favorite color, from the color picker, let's select a particular color. You're seeing whenever I am just dragging, it's changing, and for each of the change, we are getting the value of the selection. All right. Address, let's type 123. You're saying 11213. For each key in, I'm getting the value. City, let's type Z. I'm getting. State, let's select gas. I saw something to change gas. Pin, again, put some number 123. I'm getting that. And say you agree. The moment I check it, it says on. Okay. So it means the handle change function that we have written is now capable to track all the values that we are putting as an input on each of this text box. But we have to do more. The next thing that we have to do is to change the state that we have created with some initial value to the actual value from these input boxes, because that's when we can tell that we have now able to monitor the changes to these input fields inside a form using a single change handler. Let's do that. We already know how to get the value from each of this input inside this change handler, right? We know that. That means this value is something that we can replace to the property corresponds to individual input elements. And that's what our goal is. But how are you going to identify where to fit this value? If I am typing something for first name, how would I identify that I have to go to this particular contact object and then find out this F name, and for F name I have to change this value? How am I going to identify that? That's where we did a trick. The trick that we did is that for the state object's key value, we made the key same as the value of the name property of the input elements. We have done that, right? So it means as we are reading now the value with event.target.value, we can also read the name of each of this input element when user is inputting something on the respective input elements. How do we do that? Let's do that code. So for now, let's remove this console.log and create a const name equals to event.target.name. Okay. So this is going to give me the name that you have provided for each of this input. When I'm typing on first name is going to give me F name. Okay. When I'm typing on address is going to give me address, because I've given the name as address for the address input element. Then the value, we know as usual how to do it. Value equals to event.target.value. You must be wondering that I have created the name with const, but why I'm creating value with let? Is because that I am going to assign some other value to this value variable based on certain conditions. That's why it is. But why am I going to do that? If you recollect, for the checkbox, when we did on and off, that time the value that came as on, right? It didn't come as true or false. But in our state, we are managing the checkbox value as true or false, right? So for that to happen, to map that on and off to true and false, we can write a code like if event dot target dot type, if it is checkbox, then get the value from event dot target dot checked. So for a checkbox, if you do event.target.value, it's going to give you on or off. But if you do event.target.checked, if you're getting from this particular property, the value will be true or false. So for checkbox alone, we are interested to read the property from event.target.checked. But for any other input elements, we want to get the value from input.target.value. So why we have declared it as let and then overriding this just for the checkbox purposes. Okay, so now whenever we are writing something, we are typing in something on each of this input box, we have that particular input box name, we have that input box value that we have typed. We have both the information. So the only thing left for us is to update this state using that name and value. How do we do that? Here we'll be using object destructuring. If you're new to JavaScript object destructuring, I have created an extensive video for object destructuring. You must take a look into it because you will learn a lot of use cases from it. I have provided that particular video link as well into this video's description. You can go and check it out. So now let me write and explain to you what I'm doing. To update this state, you have to call this setContact method, isn't it? So you will be typing setContact, and within setContact, you have to destructure this object and you have to update each of this property based on the input elements where user is inputting the value with the corresponding value. So for that, what we'll do for destructuring, you will use this operator to first destructure the state. The state name is contact, we know that, and then you will be updating the value for a particular property. This is how you will be doing. So what is happening here? When you write something within this square brackets, this particular thing gets evaluated as a dynamic property. Okay. So think about it. First time you are typing something into the first name, F name input box. So your name is going to be F name, the value that you typed in. This won't execute because F name is a text box, is not a checkbox. Now things will come here. Contact object, the state object get destructured. And then we are saying that name, which is like F name. Okay. That becomes a property. Now it becomes a property dynamically because we are putting into the square bracket, having the value. So go to this particular object, find out if there is a fname. Yeah, fname is there. And this fname value you update with the value that we are passing. So it means that whenever I am typing something inside the fname, the state gets updated with this properties value gets updated with whatever we are typing. Now, what happened when somebody type in the password? The event.target.name become password. The value is the password value that you are typing. This doesn't get executed because the type is password. Again, the contact get destructured. We get this particular destructured object, and here it become password with the value that user typed in. It goes to this particular object, find out password is there. Yes, password is there. Update password's value from blank or whatever it was to the current value that user is typing. Now, this is exactly going to happen for each of these things. Okay, let's consider how it happens for checkbox. Somebody checked the thing in the checkbox. So the name is agree because the checkbox name is agree. Value will be on or off based on user have selected or unselected it. But we are again checking if it is a checkbox, make the value true or false based on checked value, right? So it will be like either true or false. Then it will again destructure the object, find out agree is there. Yes, corresponding to that true or false, that's what is going to print. As we are managing the state using this object, that's great. So handle change is going to now set the value. But one thing that we have not done yet, what it is to populating this value back for each of this input so that the state is maintained properly. So now for each of this input type, please come here and add a value attribute, and the value attribute will be equals to contact dot we are adding for fname, right? The fname. Okay, so it means if you are typing something into the first name, after the first name got the value, of course you have populated this first name with the value, but you also have to give this value back to the respective input element so that the state is in sync. So for that you will be giving this value from this your state contact dot fname, which is correspond to your fname input element. So like that, put the value for each of this input text. So after that, let it be for email, then for password, okay, then for color, right, then for address, for city, for state, for the zip, lastly for the input type. But here, instead of value, it will be checked because that's what we need to set for its on and off type. So it should be contact dot agree. Okay, because contact dot agree will be true or false, and we're setting back the checked value for true or false. That's it. That's what you need to do. So just to recap things once more for you, we have set up a state initialized with an object because we didn't want to handle the state individually. Each of the property of this object is correspond to the name of each of this input element. And for each of this input element, we have added a handle change, the single handle change. That particular handle change gets an event implicitly. From that, we can take name and value. Only for checkbox as a special case, we are taking the value from checked. Otherwise, we're taking the value from value of that particular events target. Then we're destructuring the state and we dynamically updating each of this property with the value that user is typing in. We are recognizing each of this property name from the input element's name because we kept the name of this input element same as the property name into this initialized object or the data structure. That's how it works. And finally, we are setting the value attribute of each of this input element from the state itself so that it is managed by the state completely. That's how things work. Are you with me? Did you understand how this single handle change event can capture all of them and make things happen? Okay, so now what we are going to do quickly, we are going to close this form stuff so that it doesn't take much space. Here we are going to add one more div just outside of the form. And here we are going to print contact.fname just for testing purpose. Okay, now I'll go back to our UI. Just pay your attention that whenever I'm typing an name inside this full name input box, I will see that the text that I'm typing will be appearing over here. So let's type TAPAS. Do you see? Tapas has come here. Let's type a little bit more. Yeah, now it is tapaScript. We can actually now get the value from each of this input and do whatever we want. We have done our work, by the way. We have now handled the state with the single change handler. But to collect these all input elements, let's do something fun. We'll be adding one more div at this side, and whenever we are typing something, we'll be forming a sentence or forming something about it and show it in the right side div, right? Let's do that as well. Now all the work we'll be doing here is kind of bonus, so that we know like how to use this data and do something which is cool. So here, along with the P8, let's add a flex layout, add a justify around. All right. With form also, let's add some class name. Let's add a background, BG gray, maybe 200. Let's add some padding. Let's add a rounded border. Let's give 50% width and some margin right. Okay. The div that we have added, let's put some class for this as well. We will also add a background, similar, some padding, rounded corner, let it occupy rest of the 50%. Let's add a flex. Let's add a flex call because we can add multiple values one by one. Let's do a justify center and do a item center. Okay. So far, let's see how this UI look like with this one input. Not bad, isn't it? So we have the form here and we have this output panel over here. Now what do we have to do? We have to capture the rest of the value and do something meaningful over here. So let's do that. So what we can do over here, we can add the value of each of this field, maybe in a P tag, in little bit more sentence wise. Check if contact dot if name is there. If it is there, then add a P tag saying, hey, contact dot if name, welcome. Okay, so this could be one section. Similarly, we can add one more section for email. Here we can say contact.email if the email is available. Thanks for giving us your email. Let's underline the email and we can say email over here. Okay, so we are showing the value of first name and email so far. Remove the welcome. Okay, now let's see the UI. Let's enter Mr. X. So hey Mr. X, welcome. X at alien.com. Thanks for giving us your email, x.alien.com. Now we can do stuff for each of these. So let me add a few stuff that you can also follow or do whatever you want. So here I have added for password, saying that hey, if the password is there, then show your password is of password.length, how many characters there in the password. If the color is there, then show the hexacode of the color, because the color value, when you select from the color picker, it returns you a hexacode value. You can also get the RGB and other format. By default is a hexacode format. So I'm showing the favorite color value. Similarly, I'm showing the address. If the address is there, show the address, city, zip, all these things side by side. And if user selected the checkbox, if it is true, contact.agree is true, you show a text saying, hey, you agree, that's great. And if it is false, you show like you don't agree with it. All right, so let's go back to UI again. Let's try the stuff. So first thing, before I entered any value, you see it is showing you do not agree with us yet. Why? Because if you remember, the state was initialized by an object and the agree value for that object was defaulted with false. So that means the checkbox value was assumed to be false. And if it was false, that's the reason it shows you do not agree with us yet. Okay. All right, we are back here and we are going to type stuff. Mr. X at alien.com, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, favorite color. Okay, you can see the output. Space, galaxy, in a gas state, put some pin and says you agree. So you see, based on the things that we have done at the left side, everything else is looking great. I hope you learned something new. I hope you enjoyed watching this video.